Hello beautiful people, in this video I want to talk about a topic that I haven't seen pop up too much in the recent research on music marketing that I've done. I've been looking into different ways to promote my upcoming album God Hit Primacy, and I've been considering how musicians can use Reddit for self-promotion. Reddit is quite an interesting social media platform for a number of reasons which I'll get into in this video, and it often isn't clear exactly where it fits in the music promotion landscape. It's pretty obvious that platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, or even YouTube are useful for artists, because they can post clips of songs or music videos and take advantage of the algorithms on these platforms to gain an online audience. But what about Reddit? Reddit has more than 1.2 billion unique monthly users as of 2024, so it's worth at least considering as a place where people can discover your music. But Reddit is unique in the sense that it's kind of an anonymous forum, whereas platforms such as TikTok and Instagram are intended to be used by real people with real information about themselves on display. It's true there's plenty of bots on these sites, and this is becoming more of an issue these days with AI advancements, but in theory it shouldn't be too difficult to find out whether there's an actual human on these non-anonymous platforms, whereas on Reddit it's often a complete mystery who you're interacting with, besides some cute little avatar and a weird little username like this one. On a platform such as Instagram, most people are more than happy to share pictures of themselves, but the culture on Reddit involves creating an anonymous identity and posting to various obscure subreddits about all sorts of things. Now, some users are pretty open about who they are on Reddit, and some celebrities even have accounts on the platform, which they do AMAs and other stuff with, but this is the exception rather than the rule, and I've seen plenty of cases where people will jump on someone who reveals their offline identity on the platform. It's just not really considered good practice to openly say who you are, although if you're well liked in the public eye, then maybe you can get away with it. This creates a challenge for musicians who want to be heard and attempt to use the platform to increase their audience. Self-promotion is frowned upon by most Redditors, and this is probably related to the anonymous identity thing. There's also a strict set of self-promotion rules which make it difficult for newcomers to toe the line. There's an interesting point to make here around the actual music versus the persona of the musician, or separation of art from the artist as it's commonly posed. What if a musician doesn't care about getting famous but still wants their music to be heard? Can they just post their music on Reddit without tying it to some overblown and self-indulgent artistic identity? I feel as if I can speak a little bit about this perspective, as it's one that I held when I first started making music and releasing it online a few years ago. I told myself that I didn't want fame. Instead, I just wanted a bit of discourse around my music, and maybe a small amount of critical acclaim would be nice. I mean, fame is totally overrated anyway, right? Look at big name artists these days and how much hate they often get for being in the public eye. However, now I've realized that my idealistic view was perhaps a bit too, well, idealistic. This notion that the music is the primary point of focus is something that just doesn't really hold up when you look at the state of the music industry today. How common is it for an artist to be successful while keeping a relatively anonymous profile? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and there are plenty of unsung ghostwriters who are the powerhouse behind a lot of really popular music we hear, but it's fairly unlikely for an artist's music to pop off or they stay under the radar. There needs to be some kind of name attached to the music for it to garner any significant amount of attention. I think one reason for this is that people are really drawn to this idea of the artist as a kind of entity in and of itself. They're inspired by this almost mythical figure of the artist, and they may even want to become one themselves. So they build up these legendary musicians in their mind as paragons of the artistic world. Legends such as Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, Freddie Mercury, and Kate Bush, as well as modern examples such as Billie Eilish and T-Swizzle, are essentially legends because we make them that way ourselves. Without our fawning adoration, these idols wouldn't be the important figures that they are, and in many ways they transcend their own music as icons within their respective genres. Even artists who create a fictional identity still end up having this identity be central to their music. Consider acts such as Daft Punk or Gorillaz, who have instantly recognizable personas that we all know and love, even though they're entirely made up. This is all a roundabout way of saying that artist identity matters for most musicians, and this makes Reddit a challenge for them if they want to use the platform to promote their music. If someone would like to point me to a Reddit user who's managed to create a popular musician persona from their account, then feel free to let me know in the comments, but I'm an avid user of Reddit myself and I don't know of a single user that fits that description. There are some users who have gained notoriety on the platform for other reasons, such as this user, who has created a name for themselves posting short poems as responses to comments. But again, these kinds of accounts are exceptions rather than the rule. Okay, but what about artists who want to use Reddit to enhance their already existing following? Maybe by posting an AMA. This does seem to be a fairly standard approach, but one problem with it is that it just won't work for newcomers or musicians with a relatively small following. That is to say, it's way easier if you have an existing following to amplify attention via Reddit, so it's simply not an option for a lot of unknown artists. Most Reddit users are only interested in AMAs from big names, or names that have already acquired some level of internet fame, And if you don't fit the bill, then you're probably wasting your time trying this avenue. This is obviously a problem that isn't unique to Reddit, but I still think it's good to be aware of it if you're an unknown artist looking to break through the noise. That initial breakthrough to gain some sort of audience is always going to be difficult, and you can't really rely on platforms like Reddit to take care of it for you. There are also more mundane reasons why Reddit isn't the greatest platform for music promotion. Although you can post links to external sites such as Spotify, most Reddit users don't like to click on external links, and longer form content such as music videos or albums tend to be overlooked. In addition to this, there's the moderation of subreddits. This is quite an important thing to understand if you're new to Reddit, and I actually got caught out by this a bunch of times myself when trying to post links to my own music. Many subreddits don't allow you to self-promote, and your post will get removed if it breaks these rules. This is something to note about Reddit in general that makes it distinct from many other platforms. It has an elaborate moderation system where moderators of subreddits will come up with different sets of rules depending on the subreddit and the type of content that gets posted there. By the way, I just want to take this opportunity to vent at the r/philosophy moderation for a second. The moderation rules here are completely unreasonable in my opinion and create a very toxic environment for those who just want to discuss philosophy casually. Personally, I don't bother posting there at all or reading too much of the content as it's so strictly curated the discussion ends up being uninteresting. The consciousness subreddit is much better in my opinion, although it's still not perfect by any means. Okay, but what about music subreddits? I'll go over some of the biggest music subreddits here along with their moderation rules so people can get an idea of where to actually post their music on the platform if they want. Technically you are allowed to post your own music to the subreddit, but you have to add a flair saying I made this and follow Reddit's self-promotion guidelines, which as I mentioned are fairly strict compared to other social media sites. Because I was curious, I filtered posts containing this flair from the past couple of months or so, and not a single one received more than 5 upvotes. In fact, many of them received 0 upvotes and 0 comments, which is basically the worst thing you can see when it comes to engagement on Reddit. It seems that people either didn't care or didn't see the majority of these posts. For a subreddit with 35 million members, you'd think that these posts would receive a little more attention, but this lines up with the fact that people tend to frown upon self-promotion on Reddit. Also, the music subreddit tends to be for commercially successful or otherwise well-established acts. As an example, there was a St. Vincent AMA which received 1.9k upvotes and 872 comments. The moral of the story here is that people like what they know and aren't really interested in seeking new music for the most part. I'll admit that I haven't listened to any of the self-promoted songs on the subreddit myself, even though I'm subscribed to it. That's partially because these posts never seem to pop up on my feed for some reason, but also because I've come to expect a lower quality of music on average from random Reddit users. That's another issue with opening up the floodgates to new musicians, which is hard to admit, but I think it needs to be taken into account. It's not just that some of the music isn't that good. It's that people will often assume that your music is similar in quality to the other music on the platform and get shared on. So it's not really that beneficial to be a big fish in a small pond in the case that you think your music is way better than everyone else's. It might be, but most people simply won't check out the pond. r/music isn't the only option for posting music though. Let's take a look at some other subreddits you can use which are solely dedicated to song posting. So I put these subreddits together because they're all essentially the same thing. The only real difference between them is the size. r/independent music has 20k members, r/new music has 105k members, r/this is our music has 96k members, and r/promote your music has 71k members. I might have missed some, but these are the main ones I could find. But are any of these subreddits actually useful for self-promotion? I've posted to r/this is our music before myself, and I got more or less the same expected result every time. Maybe 1 or 2 upvotes and a comment every now and then. But most of my posts got drowned out amongst the slew of other indie music that gets posted to these subreddits. Occasionally posts from each subreddit do seem to get a few more upvotes and comments, but the engagement is pretty bad overall and there's far more people posting than upvoting and commenting. So sadly I can't really recommend these subreddits if you are looking for more engagement around your music. But obviously it's free and easy to post here, and the moderation is essentially non-existent, so you can try it if you like. You might feel like you're posting into a void though, which is never a nice feeling and kind of defeats the purpose of social media. It would be great if these subreddits had more engagement, but they suffer from the same content pollution issue as r/music. I'm sure there are plenty of great hidden gems in these subreddits, but there's just way too much music to navigate and no easy way to sift through it. However, there are a few other options you can look at if you still really want to post your music to Reddit. This brings us to the final subreddit I want to talk about in this video, which is r/indie music feedback. Before I get into this, I just want to mention a few other useful subreddits. There's r/We Are The Music Makers, which is good for discussing the process of making music with your fellow music makers, but Rule 2 specifies that no self-promotion is allowed. There's r/Let's Talk Music, which has some interesting discussion about various genres and artists, and although more obscure artists do get brought up, the conversation tends to stick to well-known ones for the most part. Also, there's r/musicians, which is theoretically a good place to get feedback from other musicians, as there's no rules against self-promotion, but unfortunately song posts tend to be ignored here, just like the other subreddits. If you are posting your music here, I recommend giving some additional context in the post, so it's more than just a random song link which people will scroll past. But anyway, back to r/indie music feedback. In my opinion, this is the best subreddit if you want to get real engagement for your music. Why is this? Because this subreddit has a simple rule which helps avoid the natural oversaturation that occurs due to people posting and ghosting. You have to comment on 5 songs before posting, which is a great rule that incentivizes people to actually listen to other songs and provide something that's incredibly valuable for independent musicians: genuine feedback. I've posted and commented on this subreddit a few times myself, and I always try to be as honest and helpful as possible without just criticizing people for no good reason. I found that most people tend to do the same. Maybe that's because they realize if they post their own music, they'll be subject to similar standards they hold others to. Now, you shouldn't expect too much engagement here, even with the additional moderation. But I checked the top post from the last month, and it had 50 comments, which is way more than any of the other subreddits, and there were plenty of other posts that had at least some comments. This indicates that you can expect at least some airs on your music, which is better than nothing, and maybe you'll get something arguably more important than number of airs, which is useful feedback. Obviously this isn't guaranteed, and your post might still get skimmed over, or people might give bad feedback, but overall this is the subreddit I would recommend to anyone who's looking to get engagement on their music via Reddit. And now for a slight tangent, I want to mention a feature called Hot or Not, which you can find on a completely different website called SubmitHub. I'm not sure how I feel about SubmitHub's pay for consideration model, which basically involves you paying curators just to look at your music to put on a playlist. It feels a bit scammy to me, and some of these playlists aren't even that useful in terms of getting listeners for your music. However, Hot or Not is completely free and works in a very similar way to r/indie music feedback. You can listen to other people's music and get credits which will allow you to post your own music. In fact, the only significant difference from r/indie music feedback is that your feedback won't be visible on a text forum. By the way, I'm not sponsored by SubmitHub or Reddit. I'm sure they'd love to be exposed to my small but very cool subscriber base on YouTube, but I mention this so that you know you're getting 100% independent and authentic take on these platforms. That brings us to the end of this video about self-promoting your music on Reddit. I hope you found it interesting and maybe even learned something new, unless you're a complete Reddit addict like me and knew all of this stuff already. Also, as I mentioned at the start of this video, I have an album coming out later this year called Godhead Primacy, and a few of the singles have already been released. You can find them here on YouTube or all the usual streaming platforms, and I'd really appreciate it if you could check them out, and maybe even spread the word if you like them. I'm actually not planning to post any of the songs from this upcoming album on Reddit, because as I discussed in the video, Reddit isn't really the best place for music promotion unless you're already fairly well established, but if the album does get a bit more attention, I'd love to do an AMA on the platform at some point in the future. So if you're interested in that, please consider subscribing here on YouTube or on any of the other social media platforms, which really helps me get the social proof I need to do things like AMAs. I also have a Beacons link, which I'll put in the description of this video, and it has all the usual social links in it. Anyway, if you're still here, thanks for getting all the way through the video, and I'll see you in the next one.